this evening with Thomas, who is the editor at Uncommon Press, and with Mara Faye Lethem, who is the grand translator of Catalan literature, who has translated everybody from Bagunyà to Irene Solà, including some
Catalan?
Exactly. She and Peter Borja are sort of the great lights of Catalan translation right now, and it's a thrill to have her here to talk about Irene Solà. And this evening we're starting with the first night of Sant Jordi is a focus on Catalan literature, beginning with the book of Barcelona, which is published by Carlota Press, edited by Bagunyà and Zoe Turner. And I would like to actually about Carlota Press, about how the city series, because the book of Barcelona is one of these series about cities, fits into Carlota Press.
Yes, Carlota is independent publishers based in Manchester, UK, and the city series is really the start of Carlota Press. So Rob started off with Rampage, founder, he's the editor of Comma. Started off with writing short stories about places like Liverpool, Manchester, cities in North England, and just shipping these little booklets into newspapers and all sorts. And then that grew into a book form, and we now have over 25 books in the city. It's a series called Reading the City, and Barcelona is the most recent of those. We specialise in short story and translated fiction, and I think the reason we look to bringing these anthologies of short stories together in train cities to get away from any kind of meta-narratives or single narratives about the place, which often aren't formulated by the people who actually live there. So we're keen to invite new upcoming authors to explore and discuss the cities that they know better.
And we're going to hear a story from by Carlota.
What fucking setting it is that I don't get feedback.
She's been
this whole thing really needed like a 4.
Absolutely extraordinary story. It's really interesting of the writing is so Carlota, and then I read English, and I wanted to introduce Carlota is a Catalan. She has a book of short stories. In fact, this is an adaptation of her first book of short stories. And now she has just published a novel called Solà, which we'll talk about later, actually, because it's part of a new trend that's writing that has to do with rural literature. But anyway, this is the story that's definitely from Barcelona, and let's do it. And then I'll do the translation. Borja Bagunyà also has a story in Barcelona. What's the title of your story, Borja? In Catalan.
Una vida exemplar.
Okay, so let's hear Carlota, and then we'll all talk about her story.
He's getting it set. Okay. Just come back.
Hello, I'm Carlota Gurt, and I'm going to read you 2 minutes of my short story, Atoms Like Snowflakes. I'm going to... Catalan, and I think Mara Newman is going to read it in English.
Tomorrow I'm going to focus on
Àtoms com bombes. Som en una ciutat on tot sempre puja o baixa. L'etern mar o muntanya dels collons, urbanisme sobre pla inclinat amb una cicatriu en forma d'avinguda que la parteix en diagonal. El biaix físic, moral, de classe que la flagela i els turons que intenten constrènyer-la inútilment perquè no es vessi cap a tot arreu. Som a la ciutat incontenible. Sí, la senyora P viu a Barcelona i ara mateix enfila un carrer, Torrent en diuen, amb un nom rodoredianament florejat, però ja no s'hi veuen camèlies ni glicines fragants. Ara tots són motos en bateria i la hidrografia pestilent que els pixats d'agost dibuixen sobre la vorera. Sua de mala manera, no només pel calvari del pendent, sinó també perquè arrossega el carro d'anar a comprar, del qual sobresurt més de 2 pams un embalum rectangular, un trasto que, malgrat un pes irrisori de només 3 quilos 300, és capaç d'executar una tasca tormentosa, segurament la més tormentosa que hi ha i que cap humà no desitja portar a terme. El dependent li ha ofert transport gratuït a domicili, però s'hauria d'haver esperat fins l'endemà, i la senyora P ja no pot més. Fa 10 anys que estalvia, somia i, sobretot, espera. And a little bit further, it says, so she arrives home, and she unpacks this thing. Un cop al menjador, no s'asseu ni 2 minuts a descansar. Treu el paquetot del carro i el desembolica impacient. 10 anys d'espera i ara, a la fi, l'esborradora és sobre la taula. Sort que encara té cap per entendre's amb aquestes coses tecnològiques. Després de llegir la guia ràpida, l'endolla i l'embut principal comença a emetre un bronzit relaxant. Hi fica el dit petit del peu esquerre i nota un formigueig agradabilíssim, una ona melòdica que li recorre la pell. Per l'altre extrem de l'embut en surt un nuvolet que de seguida es dissol en l'aire, la seva inestimable contribució a l'aire més pol·luït d'Europa. El dependent tenia raó, no fa gens ni mica de mal. Això era l'únic que la feia dubtar, el dolor. Bé, el dolor i la sang, però tampoc se'n veu ni una gota. Un cop feta la prova de desatomització, en retira el peu, ara sense dit, i treu el tub de sortida per la finestra. Tot a punt. So, this is my short story. It's a story about a woman who wants to disappear, so she buys a machine to erase herself, and it's also a story about a city that is disappearing, Barcelona, so some customs and traditions, cinemas, shops, a way of relating to one another, a way of life. This is also disappearing. So it's a story about both disparitions. And in the end, the idea is that even though people and things and traditions might disappear, everything is built up upon all the disappeared things. So in the end, there's always something that remains in all of us and in the city itself. I think that's my point of view of the city. In this book of Barcelona, I think that the book has 2 very remarkable things. First of all, I think that it really, as I read the short stories, I realized that I could see many different Barcelonas in the book, and all of them are very real, and they are very familiar to me. So I think it's good, because you can see the city from very different angles. Secondly, the second very remarkable thing for me is that sometimes the short stories collection get a little bit repetitive, because the topic that draw them together is too central, it's too present all the time, and you get bored. But this is not the case in the Book of Barcelona, because even though Barcelona is the topic, and it's in all the short stories, it's not central enough so that it gets tiresome. So I think that the selection made by Manel Oller is a very good one. So it's made a very good job. Not only because of that, but also because he tried to include all kind of authors in the book. So new voices of new authors like me, which I have just published my first novel, and I have this short stories collection published. But there are also authors that are really solid and established in the Catalan literature, such as Empar Moliner. So I think in the end that the Book of Barcelona is very representative of what Barcelona is and of what Catalan literature is at the moment. I hope you enjoy reading it.
It's more about the first sentence,
And it came up on our own. That's why. So that's because.
notions that short stories sell, that she read a short story so quickly and they're also those ways in reality it's more about giving anybody the opportunity to say that actually the short story is as valuable as a piece of literature as a novel. You place the short story, either take the short stories from Barcelona alone in practical what's amazing is when you put the sugar in an anthology and you can not only those things you read in one story, but it's the things that community too, like there's stories and the more you go to express elders women, like even if you can just get these different perspectives and trying together or seeing where they grew up things is why it's like this. It's very great.
And the whole question of the non-celebrated stories related to the non-celebrated first one she did is that they publish, you know, in translation of
I can talk a little bit about what I think is interesting about Jordi Alba's short stories in general. As I also translated for Bellevue Press a collection of short stories in English is called Panorama. And he has a very particular vision of Barcelona that's very different from I think what most people expect. That's not very optimistic. because as a New Yorker, when I said how people I live in Barcelona, and I was like, what are they thinking about exactly when they say that? And I don't know. Right. young people who happen to be church, basically. And it's only that being Barcelona, this idea of people who have been educated in this country, or that to be educated to prepare them for jobs that don't exist, is, I think perhaps, of course, there's a little bit on the cutting edge of, with 50% youth unemployment, of this no future that young people are facing. So,
maybe it's a good time for the story.
Well, I wanted to just chime in on what Mara was saying now, because I think that a great thing of Jordi Noca's book was that actually he dealt with this idea of that the notion of future has changed, which I think it was a really interesting way of depicting a city, because when I think a writer has to write about a city, he has to decide what he thinks a city is. Is it just a mixture of relationships? Is it just a landscape? Is it an economic flux? What is it? Because you cannot depict everything at once. So what is really interesting to me, reading the book of Barcelona, was also seeing how each of the stories also presents an idea, a different idea of a city. And I think Jordi Noca, in this sense, I think because he was writing about the economic crisis of 2008 and so on, I think he actually touched something that we're still struggling with, which is how do we imagine a future that can engage us to actually do something and get out of bed every day. Because right now, I remember reading Jordi's book and having this same impression of, come on dude, this is like really pessimistic, no? Like this is the sad days of 2010 or 2009. But then, 10 years later, I realized that no, he was completely right. There's something about the idea of future that has changed. And I think writing is a beautiful and complex way to deal with this. How do we imagine something that we can relate to, that is not just saying, okay, future is gone, let's just watch the world burn, which is okay, but it's not a nice option, I guess.
It sounds like you're already working on your story for Barcelona plus 100 in your life.
I'm already thinking about that.
But it's interesting because, I translated Olivetti and I've written short stories by Carlota in 1980. So it was just sensual and happy and it was very important. To see that this is sort of the panorama of young writers that we've known about, and not finding any of those, those exciting encounters. It's very, very interesting. But speaking of rituals, Borja, would you read for us?
Yes. Should I read directly?
Yes. I think and then we'll talk about it.
Sure. Okay. I'm gonna read in Catalan from. This is the first book. The first story of this book called Plantes Interior. Story is titled Una vida exemplar. I'm just gonna read from the beginning. Va néixer un 4700 i va ser consecutivament la coseta preciosa, el primer fill d'en Carlota, el nebot de la Marina, el rei de la casa, el més valent de tots, el que ha fet una estirada, el més alt de la classe, el més gran que he vist en ma vida, el que creiem que és un cas de gegantisme a l'enfantillaç, el que amoïna una mica els pares, cames, els trucs, el pobre bèstia, ni gegantisme ni l'enfantillaç, el tema per una investigació, la portada i primera plana de tots els diaris de la ciutat, el rècord Guinness d'alçada i d'amplada humanes, i el gegant de la piragüeta, la sensació de que un humà no seria si prendre-t'ho com una amenaça o com una promesa d'un futur millor. Tantes possibilitats. El metre i mig, els 50 quilos sencers, que va acreditar any, les moltes revisions periòdiques van dividir els entesos entre els partidaris de l'acromegàlia i els de la fantiasi. Els primers deien als segons que en parlarien quan trobessin alguna obstrucció als vasos simpàtics o la raó de com un nano de la pinaueta podia haver entrat en contacte amb la filària. Segons els primers, que no hi havia hagut en la història un cas documentat de crisis tan agudes com Sant Jordi. Cap cas encara, pensaven els altres, i amb ganes de ser ells que signessin aquest primer document, es presentaven a la casa dels Carlotes a oferir-se encantats de fer-se càrrec del cas del seu fill, perquè parlaven de cas i de situació a una mare que els dedicava una estoneta de cortesia abans d'acompanyar-los fins a la porta i dir-los gràcies per les molèsties, però suposo que ho entendran.
The translation?
The translation is by Jennifer Arnold, and I will read for her today. An exemplary life. He was born weighing 10 pounds 3 ounces and was, by turns, cutest little thing, Carlota's first child, Marina's nephew, the king of his house, the bravest of all, the boy who had a rose skirt, the tallest in his class, the biggest boy I've ever seen in my life, a suspected case of elephantiasis gigantism, the cause of some worry to his parents, beanpole, an ostrich, a poor creature, a case of neither gigantism nor elephantiasis, the subject of an investigation, the headline on all the front pages of the city's newspapers, holder of the Guinness World Record for the tallest and heaviest human, and the giant Bagunyà, this year's sensation of the Carlota. We first came across Martin in a tabloid newspaper that featured the boy mountain in a rather unfortunate photo shoot. The boy mountain taking up an entire 2-seater sofa. The boy mountain holding a basketball in each hand. The boy mountain lifting a fire extinguisher with a little finger of his left hand. He wasn't even 2 years old, and when you saw his innocent smile, you didn't know what to make of him. Was he a threat? A promise of a better future? Or just another in a long list of oddities? At 5 feet tall and weighing 9 stone, during one of his many childhood checkups, he had the experts devoured. Was it acromegalia or elephantiasis? Those in the first group told those in the second that they'd start to consider elephantiasis when they found some kind of obstruction in the lymphatic arteries, or a reason why a boy born in a wetland had come into contact with filariasis. Those in the second group told those in the first that they'd never seen a case of elephantiasis on record as clear as it has now been. Not yet, George thought, and wanting to be the ones to put their name to the first, would turn up at the Carlota's house and happily offer to take over the boy's case. And his mother, when she heard them use the words case and situation, would listen politely for a brief moment before escorting them to the door, thanking them for their trouble, but sure they'd understand.
So I think we need a split. Would you give us a little how do you see this story?
Sure. The idea for me was following up a bit on what I was saying before, like okay, what to deal with when you're talking about a city. And to me, this short story about this kid, Martin, who starts growing up and growing up and growing up and never stops growing up, becoming, this giant thing that overflows every single construction that we've made for us, for our size. To me, the idea was, okay, I wanted to examine this tension between, the collective and the systemic, and what works and what we're used to, and this extraordinary thing that, in this case, and I wanted to read from the beginning precisely because of this, is just the kid that grows. It doesn't have any meaning. So the whole city starts asking and debating about, okay, what does it mean? If it means anything, is it something extraordinary? Is he a genius? Is he a newcomer? Is he a, the sign of what human bodies of Catalan people are going to look like from now on? Or is just a random accident, meaningless, big body? So to me, it was interesting to confront this. The main idea was this, okay, what do we do as a community with something extraordinary that we just don't know what it means, because we still didn't have time to get to know it. And the spoiler you're mentioning is the bleak ending, which to me was also part of this sad story, which is at one point Martin grows so much and so fast that he gets trapped inside of his own house. So what you would imagine is that, as we have seen in all movies and in all cartoons, is that the body will, burst the building and destroy the former old-fashioned structures. But in this case, it's the opposite. So the structure, the building, resists the growth spurt and actually chokes him to death, which is also a bleak, in my opinion, funny ending. Maybe not that funny, but everybody is at the end celebrates not the death of the kid, of course, he's just a kid, but how well we built all these, structures in the 70s that resisted the movement of a giant. So in my opinion, this story had something to do with a danger that we've seen in Barcelona, and I guess in a lot of cities, which is that it gets more and more difficult to be spontaneous, individually or collectively, because everything gets, bureaucratized to the minimum detail. Everything needs permit, everything needs consensus, everything needs some sort of procedure. So in a way, this story to me talked about this empire of consensus, in the sense of we prefer a mediocre building than something extraordinary that we didn't know what to do with, that might ask a city to readjust its sizes, its doors, its pathwalks, and all this. Especially because Martí is nothing special either. He's just big. And he's not guilty of being big. He's not, he hasn't done anything wrong, but not being everyone else's size. So to me, there's something there that, especially in Barcelona, worried to see how everything was becoming.
There's an official story, and everything can be done by an official narrative.
Yes. Yes. Especially in this book, there's also there's also another story of a party that never ends, which to me also had to do with this meta-narrative that Nia was talking about before. Like, okay, we are also supposed to be happy all the time. It's like sadness is no longer permitted, and not only happy in a way. We have to express this happiness in a certain manner. We have to always be happy, which led me to think that, I don't know if you agree, but at least here in Barcelona, when I was writing this collection of stories, we felt, or I felt, that the biggest taboo wasn't, gender issues or sexual issues or anything. It was sadness. Try talking to people about sadness. They get terrified and give you 10,000 solutions and run away. It's like, the squid when, it spurs that kind of ink and then flies, it swims away. Like, oh, I'm sad. Oh, what you should do is stop being sad because I'm annoyed by your sadness. So it was interesting to also talk about this, how a city imposes its own narrative to individuals.
There's actually a term for that, it's toxic positivity. You heard this? I was thinking about this story in relation to some of your other work that I've read, and I was thinking about the theme of the monstrous in your work, and how we as a society deal with monstrosity. And I'm wondering if there's some correlation with the growth of post-Olympic Barcelona and monstrosity that you're not sure is a good thing or
It's such an interesting question, and it's something that obsesses me as a writer, because the idea of monstrosity, it's not clear. In a way, when you say about the growth of post-Olympic Barcelona, so, okay, we decided in '92 that we are going to become this kind of, touristic city, beautiful, shiny, We had all those campaigns of Barcelona, Posa Guapa, Get Pretty, which was completely horrible and sexist.
Dress up Barcelona.
Dress up.
But you're right, it's feminized.
Yeah, but I remember some lipstick in the logo or something like this.
All right.
Maybe I'm making it up, I don't know, but about this monstrosity, from this point of view, to me, there was a debate to be had that we didn't have, which is what was more monstrous. Because there's this monstrosity that you just normalize on a statistic base, is that all these people are monsters, but they are a majority. And their way of thinking, what you were saying, this toxic positivity, to me is horrifying. This imperative that you have to be always jumping in joy or hide away in your own dark room. Why? Because in a way it's monstrous, but shared by a majority. So to me, Martí, in a way, this excess, this growth, this element of this dissonance, we tend to mark it as the monstrous just because it's an individual monstrosity and not collective. So my question in this story of it was, and in other words, was what would happen if Martí was a majority, or was statistically significant enough to actually challenge the idea of normality? And of course, sorry for that. I talk too much.
It's really interesting. I'd like to say something about that sentence about the Japanese. And partially, I think it's really good introduction to Carlota story, because it is about the existential sense of a woman who had wonderful life. And it's ready and nobody can her sense and it's just so I want to pick you up another good story, and we'll talk about it. Borja, I'm still thinking about your story about Martí and Barcelona with its natural.
Within the pattern, but the fight between organic life and this kind of artificial pattern is here all the time. It's here even urbanistically. When you look at the Shambhala, or when you look at all these natural, all these decisions that we make to ourselves. Okay, we give you this maze, this beautiful maze, and now you have to live in it. But then what happens if the way we live in it doesn't fit the maze? Then the maze wins. It always ends up winning. Completely.
It's interesting because, again, Carlota is the map of Barcelona and precisely that the limits. So you've got a new reflection.
Good. You can continue.
What?
You can continue.
How long do you know when it's over?
We want to see Carlota works.
So how will we know what that is?
We are in a city where all the streets go up and down. Urbanism on an inclined plane. The goddamn down presence sees the mountains. Sea to the south, mountains to the north. And a star on 4th Avenue that bisects the city on the diagonal. Skewed along physical, moral, class, and openness spirit. And the hills will try to constrain so it doesn't overflow in all directions. We are in an untameable city. Yes, Senora P. lives in Barcelona, and right now she's walking up the street. A torrent, as they call it, in this case a torrent of flowers, a la Barcelona. But there are no longer any favorite camellias or mysterious scene. Now it's all rows of motorcycles with a pestilent typography painted on the pavement by doctors. She is sweating under her hair, not just because of the Empress speaks in line, but also because she is dragging from shopping cart behind her, from which a bulky rectangular package sticks out 2 hands high, containing a device which, despite its laughable weight of a mere 3 kilos or 300 grams, is capable of executing a thorny task, surely the thorniest task there is, a task which no human being wishes to carry out. And she said, she likes living on the ground floor at street level. It seems less ambitious and more human to her than being caged in a 6th-floor apartment with too much light to stay grounded. In the foyer, she catches a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Mary McLoughlin is a wicked, crazy old woman in her house coat, with a mop of white flowers like a vintage Norman sea. She needs to go to the hairdressers, but since her life lies long in her business, the time has no seems right to try to run close to affect her mind's actions. Nor does she have any reason to be honest, why would she? This story allows us to work with well demands because the contraction is what we call as an analyzer, which will keep her up. So the first thing she does is to stick her little toe in because she wants to make sure it won't hurt herself and her. And then the machine will move to her entire body. And the beautiful thing about it is that as it gets used to her entire body, her memory is back. And every aspect of the story has to do with Barcelona. And even at the end, the actors that are expelled by the machine go out into the street and people desire to do the things that she loves to be when she arrives. So anyway, it's quite funny. And I think it definitely connects with Borja's. She's tired. But
she's not happy. She's sad. Maybe she isn't happy. She has been happy. She has had a happy life. And her son, who is a kind of sad, comes to visit her. And there's a kind of a tells a little nonsense image where he finds her just as her, the only thing left is her hat, which he used to hold, and he stores in another life. Anyway, but she had, she took control of her life. And she, I'm so enthusiastic about it.
And it's a lovely translation, and I was thinking how it ties into what Borja was saying about that no one's allowed to be sad, no one's allowed to age or be done with life, just to, play out, you can say, in Barcelona, to just say, I once visited the Eastern Museum, and I noticed before I went, George Easton, the founder of Kodak, killed himself. He was ill, but he had this note that was, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, I'm done with everything. And I'm done. And that was his suicide note. Which suggests takes a similar tack. But her son can't understand.
Can't feel it, and it's interesting.
I was just wondering, the story they were like dog painting.
Well, I would say this, I know I'm not in fact as Mara McLoughlin, because this is the author of the two but he in turn, he is a victim of this. Mara, sorry, this is translating and studying. And would you say that this is what you tradition?
His English case, my sort of retort to the thing called the imaginary realist is that he was a pragmatic surrealist, because he loved to insist, not without knowing me, but that his absurd stories were actually true. They had happened to him, and the fact is that the 20th century, especially since Catalan perspective, was really absurd. He was a homebody who ended up in foreign exile for 20 years. He was, a chef, artist who ended up in the war. And he was, he enlisted, right? He was super interested in the right rights of everything. He was a good photographer in the war, and but he definitely saw some death. And he tells this story in a non-fiction text, actually, where he talks about after the Republican defeat in the Spanish Civil War, he walked to France as about 500,000 Catalans did, and he realized people going into France. And he was, seeing men, women, and children around the world, people just leave their belongings. And he realized that he was walking through a time where he had summer, just 3 years certain life circumstances and all the hopes and dreams that he's had, I mean, how they changed. There's an absurd aspect that was also completely real. In a way, that is everything is true. We could have. I like to be Borja for staying to take this time in Barcelona. And Carlota for remaining with us. Next time, we'll all get together.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you again. Thank you.
It's a silly scene. I'm so sorry. I don't know when we started, so I don't know how long we're on. Thank you. You're very kind. It's so good to have a relationship.
Yeah, in English, yeah. I published one in Catalan before this one, Back Reputation, it was called, as an homage to the song. But yeah, it's the first one that's been put into English. And just recently, a few weeks ago, a short essay came out in English too, Haircuts by Politics. It's an amazing little book, you should read it. Careless. So what's it about? So it's about, it takes shading or not shading when you have been, in Studio One, as an example of body policing and how, it's like a very accurate example of a lot of the pressure and of control over women's and basically lower men bodies. That's what I summarize about the book.
That's a perfect start, and there are really good stories in my books that deal also with excess in body and all that. I was thinking, as Borja and Mara were talking about the story about the woman who lost her many kilos and is forced to lose them. But Mara Lethem is with us too as the translator of an extraordinary book by Solà called in Mara's translation, When I Say Mountains Dance. And I would like to postulate here that there are many nutrients in women's literature. I made a list, and for a while it was on the website of 12 names of women who have written really incredible books, and somebody said Gurt, Rather Nice, which I also translated, and Michael Rios, whom you also translated. Yes. And I'm a white woman, who I think is the president and should be, and Carlota wrote herself, and Irene, and there's just an incredible blossoming of women's literature. And one aspect of it is a really, really interesting focus on rural life, or to some extent, well, in the case of Gurt's book, it's a woman who lives between the city and the countryside. But in the case of Irene Solà, there's a really a complete reinterpretation of. This is something I was thinking when we were talking earlier about short stories too, because in fact, Bel's book is also short stories. And there's a way in which Irene Solà's book is a series of stories that are told in sex.
It could be read that way. Each chapter has a different narrator. So, you could ostensibly read them out of order. However, there is a through line, which Irene often describes, which is talking about this book as a river that sometimes is an underground river that you can only barely hear the rustle of, and sometimes is in the foreground of the chapter. What is interesting about this book is that she gives voice to not only humans but also animals and the mountains themselves. The first chapter is narrated by storm clouds. There's a beautiful chapter narrated by mushrooms, which is a very unusual collective voice. It's a beautiful chapter. I love translating that. So it was a really fun one to translate that. Irene has a lot of joy in her writing, and it shows. I was thinking about something when we were talking, which you were talking about Carlota and Irene. So Several and Victor Catalan, who, despite the name, was also a woman. And Solà.
She took on the pseudonym because she won an award. And she actually didn't get the award. They gave it to her, but that was...
When the jury discovered it was a really wonderful award, and when the jury discovered that the play had been written, it's a monologue actually, and it's a brutal monologue, and really good in literature. And when the jury discovered that it had been written by a woman, they did it like, it was of bad taste that a woman would write that. So it was customary that the winner of the award would read the theater play or the monologue out loud in the ceremony, and they wouldn't allow her to do that, so she decided not to attend the ceremony at all. It was a huge scandal. So she decided that she could write whatever she wanted to write and not be judged as a woman writer, but just as a writer. So she would take a male pseudonym, and she chose this Victor Catalan, which was the name of a character of a novel that she was writing at the moment that actually she never finished. So it was interesting.
And she wrote one of the great little novels, which is a reference in the book's title, Solà.
And it's also a reference within the novel. It's a very clear reference. We should read.
Yes, we should read. But I wanted to say, that I felt envious of Laura McLoughlin having translated it. I would have liked it. And that almost never happens.
That's a question I was curious about. I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but I know that you're also a translator. So, how was the relationship with Laura? We worked together actually. Well, she worked on the books, both on the Winds and Carol's. And she translated them almost simultaneously. So what I did, being a translator, I wanted to leave her alone to do her thing and not meddle too much. But speaking English myself, it was too much of a temptation. So when the temptation was finished, I did have a look at it, and I just got like little comments here and there, like very, very specific things of the acting. I would rather say these were, but it was basically what's been published is her translation. I just like commented on a couple of very superficial things that nobody would have noticed if I hadn't pulled them out. And it's how authors can be annoying sometimes, so that was really annoying. But the translation was really good, and I was really happy. But I was really flattered by what you said. Thank you. Being a translator myself, I know what you mean when you read something and you say, I really want to translate it. And so I really appreciate your comment.
There's only one book I translated two books by myself, and there was one that I translated almost half of it, and it didn't get published in good time. It was trying to sell it in the 90s, before the Institute of New York existed, before there was funding for these things. Shout out to the Institute of New But when Peter was translated, which for me is the Bible, I just wanted to die. Anyway, but the important thing is that the book is out there, and I love reading other people's translations, so it's also good. But with that, it would be great if you read from one of the things. These are really wonderful, very, very short, so many of them are
Maybe I can read like a little part of it in Catalan and then you can read the English maybe, because I think for people who don't speak Catalan it's nice to hear a little bit of it, but it might be too much to hear a whole story of it. So, maybe did I lose this? Or did I lose this? Yeah, here, I got it.
That is going to be Babaluba.
Un dels moments del dia que més li agradava a Laura McLoughlin era l'estona que dedicava a mandrejar els matins abans de llevar-se. Solia despertar-se cap a les 7, però no es llevava mai abans de les 8. Deixava que se li despertés el cos a poc a poc, estirava els dits dels peus, obria les orelles, lligava obrir els ulls. No tancava mai les cortines i si no l'hivern entrava una carolada per la finestra. Al davant del llit, Bagunyà hi tenia un prestatge casat de fusta massissa que anys enrere havia estat al menjador. Se l'havia fet portar a l'habitació perquè li agradava mirar-se en despertar les 42 nines que havia anat portant el seu fill durant els anys que havia treballat de mariner en qualsevol vaixell que volgués emportar-se. Eren nines barates, de mal gust, guarnides amb vestits folclòrics de països remots. Li feien companyia a Bagunyà d'aquelles nines i per això havia demanat al noi del segon i al segon que li portessin el prestatge a l'habitació. Al matí, obria els ulls a les mirades i una escalfor de vida li pujava les cares.
You know, I remember it as being short because it's such a good read, but it's not really short, so I think I'll read a little bit more than you did, and then we'll talk about it. We'll do the spoilers in a minute. Okay. And Laura McLoughlin, once again, is the wonderful translator of this book. Babaluba. One of the moments of the day Laura Kashmir liked best was the time she spent lazy in the mornings before getting up. She usually woke up around 7, but never got up before 8. She would allow her body to awaken little by little, stretch her toes, wiggle her ears, take time opening her eyes. She never closed her curtains, and if it wasn't winter, a friendly brightness filtered through the window. In front of the bed, Babaluba had a heavy solid wood shelf that had been in the dining room years before. She had moved it into her room because on waking she liked to look at the 42 dolls her son had brought back for her over the years he worked as a sailor on whatever ship might want to take him. They were cheap dolls in poor taste, adorned with the traditional costumes of remote countries. Those dolls kept Babaluba company, which is why she had asked the boy on the second floor and his friend to bring the shelf into her room. On opening her eyes in the morning, she looked at them, and a flush would rise to her cheeks. She never got up before 8, but never left later than 1:30, and in a nightshirt and thick shawl, she would go to the kitchen and prepare a cup of watery coffee, take a pickled cucumber from a glass jar, and spread butter on a slice of bread. She would listen to the radio in the morning in Babaluba while she rinsed the dishes for breakfast, washed her armpits with cold water, put her hair up in a bun, and got dressed. So one of the reasons I think that I thought this was a good choice to read is that it connected so well with my own story as well. So there, once again, it's an elderly woman, and in her solitary routine. And once again, there's a kind of embrace of life that happens in the personal story. In the case of Becky, it's an embrace of death. But in the case of Babaluba, also, would you like to tell us a little bit about how, not only the plot of the story, but also how you decided to write that?
So the whole book, for me, what ties the story together is the fact that the characters are living in difficult times. Sometimes they are hopeful times, and sometimes not so much. But they take action somehow, individually and collectively, into changing things. And sometimes they are really real things or personal things, like discovering desire or letting your bodily sensations take over somehow. And sometimes it's like bigger revolutionary moves. And in the case of this story, it was prompted by a photograph, a picture that I saw in the newspaper during the protests in Kyiv in 2014, when the president decided not to sign the treaty with Europe. And then there were like big protests in the Ukraine and in Kyiv. And I saw this picture of an elder woman holding a mirror into one of the policemen that were repressing and that were actually hitting pretty hard on the people who were protesting. And I thought it was so powerful that, you know, look at yourself in the mirror, like you are a person, remember you're a person somehow. Well, that's what I interpreted. And I thought that was really powerful, and this stayed with me for some months. And then one day I thought that maybe it would be an interesting story if the person, because this became like a mainstream thing, or I don't know if mainstream, but a lot of people would carry mirrors to the protests so that the policemen and the military would, you know, have to face themselves in the mirror, literally, before, you know, attacking the population who was protesting. Some of them peacefully, some of them maybe not so much, but who were protesting mostly. So I thought it was a powerful idea to me that the first person who did this would be an older woman who was, you know, maybe not really doing this for a huge like European feeling or whatever, but just out of sheer indignation of the injustice of the police turning against her own people. So
it's a wonderful character study because she's feeling a little bit old and tired, but her young neighbor comes and shows her where the police had beaten her, and she's so full of indignation that when she just has this impulse when she looks at herself in the mirror to take the mirror down.
And she walks for miles carrying the mirror, and it's heavy, and she's tired, and it's like, no, I'm absolutely amazed.
It's interesting that you know, nobody knows that also, this is her own brother's rebellion, nobody knows that she started this, none of her neighbors know. It's just lovely.
I think this is how it works in a lot of instances, that someone will do something that then becomes revolutionary and that is adopted by other people, and that person is, you know, goes completely unknown into history, especially if the person is not a white male, etc.
You have another story about that. I think it's the singing revolution.
Yeah.
But also this, okay, you explain how, you know, what the inspiration for the story was. We have many stories that are located abroad. Is your process in most cases reading about something and just imagining what the psychology was behind it?
A lot of the times it's not only reading, but maybe I meet people who will talk me about their experiences and their life experiences, and those stories will stick with me for a while, sometimes even for years, and then I need to write about them, and you know, the story keeps building up, and characters, you know, grow up somehow, and finally I write them. And in the case of the Singing Revolution, it's set in Lithuania, and what prompted the story was actually a fellow translator that I met in a translation conference, and she was really young. I love them. So she was really young when this happened in 1981, and she can remember that she was deaf for a few weeks, even months after the fact, and she explained to me her experience about it, and I was really curious because I had never really known what this was about. So I started researching, and I found really compelling stories about, you know, one of the mother of the boys who were killed that night in Lithuania. And you can research the internet and you can actually find the video of the Lithuanian TV being occupied by the Russian soldiers, and you can see the anchor woman in the news saying, okay, the Russian soldiers are here, we're going to try to keep informing, and it's really shocking that you can actually see that. And this was on TV, this was live on TV. So I kept researching this, and what I did was four little stories of four different characters and their point of view on that night, and also on the ones that followed, which were really harsh also for Lithuanian people. And I wrote these little testimonies of them. And it's weird because I wrote this in between 2014, 15, 16. The book was published in 2016. It has now been translated into English, and it shows how everything keeps coming back, and we have now the war in Ukraine and with the Russians and everything, and all of a sudden you see that this comes from something else that has happened before and has had its consequences.
It's very interesting because I read today that Mara Faye Lethem was in Solà, and one of the themes of Sant Jordi this year is the persistence of memory. In the case of the exhibition of APRIL18, it's memory through landscape and architecture. But in the case of two of the exhibitions, one which is about the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, and the Spaces of Absence, and the other is Espejos. And Teresa Toviera of the Associación Cultura y Conflicta went to Bosnia to interview the women who had been survivors of rape and the children who were born of those rapes. And Mara Faye Lethem's new book is a novel about the woman. She learned about that story through Teresa Toviera's exhibition, which we will see here in the Church City Theater Center, and has written a novel about it. So, the chain of circumstances. But it's all about the persistence of trauma. Go ahead.
I feel that literature and art in general is a great way of making us really understand what this means. Because in Catalan's book, which I have had the chance to already read, I think what's really powerful about it is that you can read numbers of how many rapes are, right now happening in Ukraine. You cannot read about rapes as a war weapon used in other wars that are happening also right now, because there are levels of wars, and depending on where they happen, they are important or they are not. But this is happening right now, and you can read the numbers and you can read the news stories and whatever, but just it's noise somehow. But when you read a story with the characters and it goes, I don't know, I think at least for me, it makes me understand better, like the magnitude of it and the deepness, and it gives me a more real connection, even if it's through fiction, and obviously through the form of art. So I think it's really important to be able to read certain kind of stories that have not really been told up until pretty recently, and that will connect with the broader theme of the panel about women's literature or literature that's not made.
Mara, I was thinking that the persistence of memory through landscape. It's funny. Okay, here's another thing. In Brigadistas, Jordi Borja's, Brigadistas is a book about the Civil War, which will also be discussed in fact, will be staged on Thursday night after Espejos presents The Light of a Savior exhibition. Because it's about the international volunteers who went to who flocked Spain in the Iberian Peninsula to fight fascism before it was fashionable. But Jordi Borjas talks in his prologue about playing in the vineyards of the Baron who lived near his town and finding and how the entertainment of the children was finding all of the treatise of war and cleaning it off, and they knew everything about the Civil War through the German grenades they found and all of the soldiers' paraphernalia that they came across. And that's in Irene as well as book also.
Yes, there's a character who, when she's young, she asks her father to buy her a metal detector so that she can find more grenades and rifle bits, and that's her hobby as a child.
But that's the persistence of memory under the landscape, because it's not visible when you think a little bit, but it's right there. It's right there.
But I was thinking while you were talking about the play, there's still something in the
There's
woods.
still some
How, it's a play written in Catalan, telling the stories of these children and their mothers. But in a lot of ways, the children are more willing to speak than the mothers. But they've done an incredible job of tying it in, because there's a part where they're talking about what's happening in Barcelona, what people in Barcelona are doing, and all that work is going on, and they juxtapose those things in such a way to make you really realize, there's that one too, of, they were happy during the war, right? But, life goes on in a way, which is also, of course, one of the themes of Irene's book. And, someone is dying for them. It's perhaps tragic for their wife, their children, but life goes on, and especially in the geological sense, life goes on. Should I
Yes,
read a
please
little
read.
bit?
Yes,
I didn't prepare to read in Catalan just for my translation, but I chose something that I've never read before. We've been doing a lot of promotion for this book, this is a chapter that is called The White Tablecloth, and it's narrated by a character named Sio, who is the widow of the family that, as I mentioned, is the river that runs through this novel, this family. Sometimes his hands, when he holds a cup and drinks, when he uses a knife, when he places them on his knees, will set my heart spinning because they're so like Domenick's. Other times I look at the old man, so silent, so withered, so sad and thin, and I simply can't believe he's Domenick's father. Grandpa John's mouth is all dried up like a raisin. Sometimes men's tongues get stuck and just shrivel in their mouths. They don't know how to open up and say nice things to their children, or nice things to their grandchildren. And that's how family stories get lost. And you no longer know anything more than the dry bread you eat today, and the rain that falls today, and the ache in your bones today. Sad mountains. Those mountains took Domenick from me. My Domenick. A lightning bolt went straight through him like a rabbit, 2 months after he was born. And that was lucky, I think, because I didn't pass on the grief, and I didn't infect him with my tears through the blood, the way I would have if Domenick had died while I was still expecting. Then my son would have come out tarnished, blue. No, I cried alone. I cried all the tears God gave me in one sitting, and I was left dry, a wasteland. And Eli was the happiest fatherless child in the world, the happiest fatherless children, the least orphaned children. Those are mine. It's as if they didn't need a father. Lucky. But sometimes a woman feels like giving up on life, when lightning goes straight through a man like a rabbit, when a branch pokes a hole in her heart, but doesn't kill her. And she's forced to live. The children cry and force the woman to live. The old man is hungry, calls out for her. The folks in town wear green beans and zucchini to oblige her to keep on stops being the center of her own life. She's no longer the sap and the blood, because they forced her to renounce everything she ever wanted. Here, throw them all away, all the things you've ever desired. Toss them into the road, into some ditch. The things you used to think, the things you loved. And look how paltry, how measly they were. That man and that mountain. They make a woman want a small life, a runty life, like a pretty little pebble. A life that can fit in your pocket, like a ring or a hazelnut. They don't tell a woman that she can choose things that aren't small. They don't tell her that small stones get lost. They slip through the holes in your pocket, or that if they get lost, you can't choose new ones. That lost stones are lost forever. Throw out your heart, too, into the road, amid the mud and the brambles. Throw out your joy, throw out your soul and hugs and kisses, and your marriage bed. You must, you must. And now get up and look at yourself on this morning, so thin and so blue. Go down to the kitchen, put food inside your mouth. Put it inside the children's mouths, and inside the old man's mouth. Then inside the mouths of the cows and the calves and the sow and the hens and the dog. You must, until you forget everything else with all those musts. I didn't nurse Biladi because my milk was salty, and my son grew like a flower with thinned cow's milk and store-bought formula. I scarcely even watered and pruned it, that flower. Your favorite has to be a child that comes out of you like a root. I love them, my children, despite my soul's limping, despite the yoke and the despondency and the heaviness. Despite the fact that there was nothing in the promises I made, the promises they made me make about having to raise them on my own. I wanted a husband, my husband. If they came, the babies, well, that was fine with me. But just the babies? Why would a woman want just the children? I barely got to taste him. Before I could lick the honey from his lips, they'd gone straight through him like a rat. So I've been thinking a lot about CO and her role in this book and her lot in life, partly because of the theatrical version of Sant Jordi, which I adapted my translation to make subtitles for it, and it's very interesting to kind of see the book in a new light through the theatrical adaptation.
What did you learn? What aspects did it, even when you do a translation, there are certain semantic fields of the words that are there in the original are de-emphasized and others are brought to the surface. So whether staging seems to happen.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that remained. It was a very well-done adaptation, but then there were also things that we did. And won quite a few awards. I wasn't able to see it live, but I saw the recording of it. And very pausing a lot. There's musicians on stage. It's quite different, but it's made me think about the novel in retrospect in a different way. I sort of hear some of the voices in a different way. But to me, that's an interesting voice because some parts of this book you sort of forget that it takes place in the present because it has this kind of very universal voice. There's one point when they mentioned Facebook, and you're like, what? Facebook? But I thought there's a lot of different women's voices in this book that Irene There's the second chapter is through the voice of 4 women who were hanged as witches in the 17th century. And so when she was researching the book, she was reading the actual witch trials. But she said that she realized, she's reading the handwriting of the men and the story, their side of the story, were the men who hanged them, not the women themselves. So she gives them a voice in this story. But CO, she left the town she lived to go live on the mountain, and she didn't really know anything about rural life. And then her husband is killed in this big thunderstorm, and she's kind of stuck there, not knowing what to do. So,
and to know where her place is, because she's a mother without being a wife. I'm trying to remember the story. There's a person who has a conflict with. It's in the book, or is it in world literature today? The story that was conflict. With the role, with Rome, but I can't. I've been trying to.
The one in world literature that was like la 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 la. Well, if it's a conflicting role with motherhood, maybe, is that what you meant?
Well, actually, there are recurring themes of preparing food for people.
Oh, yeah, that's not the one here. That story, it's a woman who's basically making meatballs, and that's a very traditional Catalan dish, meatballs, like something you would eat. And it takes time to do it, like it's not something that you would, do in 20 minutes, it takes time. And she's there, and then her husband arrives, and she's thinking, and she doesn't have enough money to buy a new coat for the boy, or whatever, for their son, and she's, worried about money and thinking about her own stuff. And then her husband arrives and basically rapes her without actually realizing that he's raping her, and in the middle of her making a face. Yeah, it feels like, I'm back from work, I feel like having sex, I'm not even going to look at her in the face, and just, gonna do whatever I want. And and this is quite something that happens a lot in straight couples, that the men have no idea that they are rapists, and the women kind of tend to pretend that they don't realize they are being raped, and of course this builds up and has a lot of consequences. But this story was actually told to me by a woman who lived it in first person. And as she was telling me the story, she didn't think that this was sexual assault or anything. And then after a while of her telling me about it, she was like, well, maybe he was not right that he did this.
But one of the things that's happening in the story is that she's negotiating, between her son's desires and her husband's desires, because incarnated in the meatball. Because the husband loves the meatballs with lots of parsley and garlic, and his child refuses to eat parsley and garlic, so she's mincing everything really tiny so the little boy won't notice it, but the husband will enjoy it, and it's really fascinating.
And you never know whether she likes it or not. Like she's cooking, and she's going through all this effort. She's being raped in the middle of cooking, and you never meet what's that, like a fly, where they get into their slush, and she has to reel them and whatever. And then, but you never know what she wants. So you learn about what her husband wants and learn about her child wants, but you have no idea whether she likes the garlic or doesn't. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter to her. It's like I need to, do whatever I need to do for these people, and I love them in this very toxic way that we are taught to love, and that's all. And I think that what's really shocking for me about this story is that I remember when I wrote it that a couple of my friends read it. Very nice men, my age, allies, and they read the story and they didn't feel that this was ready. And then when I told them, well, this is rape, and they were like, oh yeah, I guess you could look at it like that. Okay. And one of them was like, this is not really a rape, this is like bad sex, she's not enjoying it, but it's not really a rape because it's his wife. And it's like, okay. No problem. But the other friend of mine said, I'm not sure I have ever done this. And it really upset him and it brought some reflections for him and I hope some change in his view of what's acceptable and what's not. It was shocking for me because when you think of people who will, dismiss sexual assault, you will think of very rude men or very chauvinistic or whatever, and you wouldn't think that your friends think that. And for me, seeing that my own friends, people who I loved and appreciated and admired in a lot of ways, would not consider that this was rape, it was like eye-opening for me somehow. And again, it's one of these sides of the story that doesn't really get told or didn't really get told. Maybe nowadays this is changing.
And so I think I remember that in the context of Solà because she's there was a question of rape and the husband is absent, but she's trying to negotiate who she is in the absence of the husband and in the presence of the child.
Yeah, she's a very compelling character. Of course, she only has voice in that one chapter, but she talks about their sex life and how she kind of learned to enjoy sex and their honeymoon, and it's quite poignant.
I would love it though if you talk a little bit about the mushroom chapter.
Mushrooms. Well, in an interview recently, I said that the first movie of Toy Story, where those little dolls that are the claw, he chooses, right? It's one of the few examples of a collective voice, like the mushroom. So I remember seeing that. I don't know how old I was when the first Toy Story came out. I saw it in the theater, and I loved that. Giving them that voice, and so I think I was old when it was fabulous. So the mushrooms, their claw is the rain, and they just love it. But they have no individuality, so it's a very interesting narrative voice. I mean, I've never read from that chapter. Some of these chapters out of context, it's hard to.
Well, but one of the interesting things about mushrooms, and the reason I love it, and she concentrated on it, is the whole new understanding of the communication of the spores in the underground forest grows and all of that, and how the trees are all communicating with one another through that. So the evocation of this, yes, there is communication.
Yeah, their mantra is that the cap of one is the cap of us all. So there's something kind of religious about it. I don't know why, but a very fun voice. I have a question for Beth and for you, Marianne. Just because I was thinking a little bit about the title of our talk today, and women's writing, the ways that we don't necessarily fit into these parameters, or we do, but also because I was recently kind of faced with some of my own prejudices about what women's writing is. In English we have this term which is chick lit, which is kind of it's
my master's thesis on that.
Oh, perfect. I recently, as I say, felt a little like that. I was questioning my preconceived ideas about someone read a recent book on Bagunyà and said, it's really good, and I was like, it's really good, because I thought of it as like a little chick flick. And I, of course, love women's voices, like Vivian Gornick, there's a lot of women's voices that I love, in part because they're women's voices. At the same time, it's like a snobby, maybe, rejection of certain marketing tactic and ways that women's writing is packaged or sold. That I realized I kind of looked down on in a way that I wasn't comfortable with realizing. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you about that. What is women's literature?
I think it has a lot to do with alterity and anything that is not seen from the perspective of a man, and particularly a wealthy white man, probably straight, not necessarily, probably, and obviously cisgender, is considered something that's it's not the proper thing, but it's not a sub-product, and something that's not to be regarded as important as the real thing, and that's what the men produce. And even if we can embrace feminism and realize rationally that this is not the real life, and this is not reality, I think this prejudice is still within us, and it's part of life somehow. What we know from when we ask readers what they read, and there's a survey from 2017, and it has not been updated, and I'm really waiting for this update, about readership in Catalan language in particular. And what we learned is that when the book is written by a man, people who read it are everyone. So all of them are men, all of them are women, and the ones who are not either are not counted, but we assume that we will read them too. But when the writer is not a man, so mostly when the writer is a woman, only 20% of the readers are men and 80% of the readers are women. I see this all the time in my talks, that very, very few men will come, and a lot of them will be queer. So it's it's there. And I have a lot of exposure with that. I write that I want to write. I'm not affected as a creator by this, but it's a fact that I was not expecting when I first started publishing. I thought I was writing books, and people love books, so people will read books. Obviously, that's not the case, so we have certain preferences. So I think also that what we have learned to value are certain topics that are within the male experience more than other experiences. And even when they are not, I think of Nausgaard, for example, there comes this guy who writes about the tedious life of raising children and staying at home. Hello. I mean, shut up already. And then notice that 600 more pages coming. So, and he's a genius, and if a woman writer wrote that, she would be absolutely dismissed. So we appreciate certain things just because they are done by men, and I think it's very healthy to acknowledge that, and it's very healthy to approach literature from someone else.
You could say he's subverting the reading, but the fact is, it's because it's a man, but it's very well.
Yeah, it's
I mean, if it were the reverse, a woman writing about being, I don't know, an advertising executive, it wouldn't have the same impacts.
No, and that has been written 1,000 times, and it's still not being appreciated. But it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. You do your thing, I don't really care. But I think, again, that when we talk about women's literature and thinking about specifically Catalan literature, which is one that I think I know, I read a lot of them. The only thing that I can find in common with a lot of these writers is that they are not men. Because if I think of Bagunyà, for instance, I'm not sure, I don't think she has been translated into English, and she should. It's gorgeous writing.
powerful writing that I love. And it has nothing to do whatsoever with other writers like Irene Solà, which also writes beautifully, or Borja. So it's, I think they put us all together just because we are not men. But they don't say men's writing because that's the real writing. So I think we should just dismiss the whole idea of this. And I don't like the labels, but I can see how they are helpful. And for instance, I'm really interested in characters that are not just cisgendered or are not straight. And labels for me are useful because if I pick up a book at random in a bookshop, it's going to be a straight male. So I just don't read anymore with these unless they are absolutely awesome and exceptional, because I already read all of them from the classics and up until when I was 25 maybe, that was what I read. So now for the rest of my life maybe I will read something else. So as much as I don't like labels and maybe I would like the world to function in a way, they are useful to me because it makes it easier for me to find books that I'm interested in. So hopefully when I